Have you ever found out about a problem long after everyone else seemed to know about it? By the time it reached the executive table, staffing was already a bigger issue. The tension between teams is already affecting flow. The issue that could have been addressed early is now bigger and harder and maybe even more expensive to solve. Why did no one raise this sooner? In many healthcare organizations, people did raise it, just not in a way that traveled upward clearly, early, and intact as truth, because it got softened, delayed, filtered, and probably managed. Not because people were trying to hide it, but because the structure between the front line and the executive table changed the version of the truth on the way up. So that's what this episode is about. Why leaders often make good decisions, but only on part of the real picture. And why the problem is not usually a communication effort alone, it is the communication architecture. So picture this. A manager notices a pattern. Maybe staffing is getting a little more challenging. Maybe there's a system or process that's starting to break down. Maybe tension between two teams is really starting to have an impact on patient flow. And so they mention it to their director. The director hears it, but they're already carrying a full plate. And it doesn't feel urgent enough yet to push upwards, so they keep watching. A few weeks later, it's bigger. Now it gets escalated. But by the time it reaches the VP or executive director, it's already a problem and not an early signal. And the VP wonders, why didn't anyone flag this sooner? No one hid it on purpose. Every person in that chain made a reasonable call, but it was the structure that created a delay. And so by the time the full picture arrived, the easiest window to act had already passed. And so this is one of the most common patterns I see in healthcare. Leaders are not usually dealing with no information, they're dealing with filtered information. And that is the communication layer. So I want to say something directly. Most senior leaders are not working from the full picture of what's happening in their organization. And it's not because people aren't communicating. They are. But what reaches the executive level is usually a version of the truth, but not the whole truth. It has been shaped somewhat, filtered, softened, probably adjusted, not in a malicious way, structurally. In the leadership performance cascade, the communication layer sits below psychological safety. And that matters because communication does not move independently. It moves according to the conditions above it. When safety is high, people raise concerns earlier, signals come to the surface when they're still small, and the picture that reaches the executive table is closer to reality. When safety is low, information gets managed or filtered. People share what feels safe to share, and they soften or dampen what might create tension. They wait until something feels serious enough to justify the risk of bringing it up. And by the time it feels serious enough, it's often already quite a problem. So the issue is not whether communication is happening. It is. The issue is what shape the truth is in by the time it gets to you. You're not operating with the full picture. You're operating with what your architecture allowed to reach you. And those are two very different things. So how does this happen? There are three filters I see again and again. The first one is the translation filter. Every time information moves from one level to another, someone has to interpret it. So a frontline staff tells manager. The manager summarizes for the director. The director summarizes for a VP, and every step involves judgment. Okay, how important is this? How urgent is it really? How will this message land? Is it really ready to go up to the next level yet? And each of these choices determines what gets passed on and what gets left out. By the time the issue reaches the executive level, it may already look quite different from what was first observed. The second filter is the protection filter. People protect themselves. They protect their teams, and sometimes they also protect the leader above them. A manager may hesitate to escalate because they don't want their team to look weak. A director might soften a concern because they don't want to look like they can't manage their portfolio. So the goal isn't to be deceptive. The goal is relationship management, but the effect is the same. So the picture gets a little different or maybe a little softer with each layer it passes through. The third filter is the urgency filter. In healthcare, everything feels urgent. So people develop a threshold for what's worth raising. That threshold is not mainly set by policy. It's set by experience. What happened to the last person who raised an issue early? Did they get support? Or did they get more scrutiny? Were they given more work, or did raising this cause more tension or problems? So if raising things early has felt like it had a cost before, people wait longer. And longer means probably bigger by the time it arrives. And so that is how communication gets filtered. And of course, it's not because people don't care, but it's because the system has taught them how to move information safely. So what does this cost? Firstly, it costs decision quality. If the picture reaching the executive table is not complete, then the decisions built on that picture are only built on a partial foundation. So they may have a great strategy and logic, but if the information underneath is filtered, then guess what? Friction will show up when that decision hits the ground. And that's often why well-designed initiatives land badly. And it's not because the people on the ground don't understand it, because it was built without the full reality in view. The second cost is it costs early intervention. Because as we all know, problems caught early are usually easier and cheaper to fix. Problems that sit for months become larger, probably more costly, and definitely much harder to solve. When the communication architecture creates a delay, the system keeps turning small problems into big ones, and then spends enormous amounts of energy cleaning up what could have been addressed much sooner. The third cost, it costs trust in both directions. When staff and managers see decisions coming down that clearly don't match what's happening on the ground, they draw a conclusion. Leadership is out of touch. When leaders keep getting surprised by problems other people knew about, then they draw their conclusion. Why didn't anyone tell me? And see, both sides are seeing their truth, but neither side is truthfully pointing out to the actual cause. The cause is the architecture between them. So if you're making important decisions on a filtered picture, that doesn't mean that you're failing as a leader. It means you're leading inside of a structure that was never designed to give you that full picture. And that can be changed, but only if you commit to clearly bringing it to full awareness first. So what do you do with this? The answer is not just communication training. It is not just better meeting agendas. It's not just a new reporting structure. I mean, these things might help a little bit, but they don't solve what's producing the filter. The real intervention starts above the communication layer. If the identity layer is producing over responsibility at the top, then the people below are not fully clear about what they own and when they should act. And if the regulation layer is producing urgency and reactivity, then early and uncertain signals don't feel safe to bring up. And if psychological safety is low, people are already doing the math on what's safe to say. And the communication layer is simply where the results of that math become something you can see. So the real diagnostic question is not why aren't people communicating better, because that puts the problem on the wrong people. The better question is, what in this architecture is producing the filter, and which layer is it coming from? And start there. Because when the layers above communication are working well, then communication improves naturally. You don't have to force it. It improves because the conditions for honest communication finally exist. In the next episode, I'm going to go into the culture layer, why culture change programs keep failing, and why culture is almost never the source of the problem, even though it's often where organizations target their solutions. So if this episode on the communication layer really gave you an aha or brought something into focus for you, then the executive leadership briefing below will give you a little bit of a simple map of the full cascade. Be sure to hit the bell icon and subscribe to my channel on YouTube so that you won't miss an episode. And if you want to keep going, I will see you on the next video.